Alright guys and girls, this is a long play review for Buggy Boy on the Amstrad CPC, released by Elite Systems in 1988. And this is of course an arcade conversion of a very popular coin-op released in 1985 by Tatsumi. It was picked up in North America as Speed Buggy by Data East, and there was different versions including an impressive panoramic free screen cockpit cab. Wow. And there was the standard upright cabinet released a year later, which was named Buggy Boy Jr. Although the cabinet is shown on the box of the home computer versions with a stand behind the player and pipes above, I can't seem to find a real photo of it in an arcade, so I don't know if that ever existed with the thing at the back and the pipes above. But anyway, as always in my videos looking at arcade conversions, we're going to take a very quick look at the arcade original first, just for comparison purposes. So here we are with Buggy Boy Jr. in MAME, and you can see there's 5 courses to choose from. Each has 5 sections or laps. The first one, the off-road one, which we're doing here, loops for 5 laps but adds in more obstacles each time. Whereas the others, the north, east, west and south, are checkpoint races over 5 different stages. So yeah, you got to collect the flags in colour order, displayed sort of top right. So we need the yellow flag next. Time gate there, more on that in a second. And if you get them in the right order and collect all the flags, you get a mega bonus score. Dark blue flags to collect next. Gates to drive through for points. There's the dark blue flag. Oh, just missed it. And there's the time gate. So those are the most important. The time gates add an additional 2 seconds onto the timer when you start the next stage or lap. And there's 3 per lap on a stage, meaning you can gain about 6 seconds in total. And that will be vital as the time limit is very tight. So there you go, there's the arcade version. So here's the box art for the budget re-release on Elite's Encore budget label. But keep fresh in your mind how the game looked, felt, what the graphics and sounds were like, etc. And pay attention there was no music in game and such like. Anyway, let's get the Amstrad version fired up here. And you actually get 2 loading screens here. One has actually the credits there, which is handy for me. And quite a nice loading screen picture there, to be honest. Good stuff. So we know that the coding was done by Andy Williams and graphics by Pete Tattersall. We'll talk about them in a bit. And here we are on the main title screen. And it's pretty much the same as the arcade one. And there's all the different courses. We will start with the off-road one and then go through them in order. And there's the jingle from the arcade version. And here we go in game. You've got a low and high speed gear. But notice here actually the flags are all the same colour. First crash there. But if you actually hit a rock after doing a jump, you actually land back on for all 4 wheels and can carry on, but with just a bit of a reduced speed. And there's a time gate. If you remember from the footage we just saw from the arcade version, the time gate appeared in exactly the same place in the arcade version as did these rocks there. So they very roughly followed the course layout of the arcade version, at least on the off-road one, especially that jump there over those gates to get to the second time gate. So yeah, they've tried to be as accurate to the arcade as possible. Everything is moving really smoothly, and I like that. It's not exactly the speediest of games though, but it's not really that far off the speed of the arcade one. I don't know. It is a bit slow, there's no question about that. We do have some flickery graphics and sprites every now and again, especially when they sort of end up bunched up on top of each other as they come further into the screen in the scaling. Oop, first crash there, landed on my roof. You can just about squeeze through those gaps there as well. Nice they got the tunnels in the game. But yeah, everything's looking quite nice. The buggy sprite is obviously is nicely drawn in only sort of 3 colours though. It's a bit of a shame they could have added a bit more splash of colour on the main sprite, but it's quite detailed. The rocks, the gates, the flags all look quite nice. I like the red and white stripes on the side of the track there. That gives you the good illusion of like moving forward and speed, even if it isn't the most speediest thing in the world. Nice, they got the wall to the right there coded in and working quite nicely. And there's a lot on screen. Doesn't seem to be any slowdown. And a nice sort of noise there when you go over the finish line for the lap. Oh yeah, of course there are certain objects that don't immediately crash the car, but will cause something to happen. So there's like little rocks in the road that if you run over them, your car, well, sorry, your buggy goes on 2 wheels. There you go, there's it happening. And they go on the other side. This is supposed to score you mega points. I can't tell if you're actually scoring higher than normal. It's hard to see from the score meter there. Possibly. In the arcade version, if you can stay on 2 wheels for as long as possible, you get loads of mega points. Oh yes, there's the football. Every now and again, you'll see a giant beach ball or football, and if you smash into it, you get lots of bonus points. So this is actually quite a good score attack racing or driving game. There's a bit of risk and reward gameplay, so this might be good for a little competition one time, a high score competition. Do you go for those flags? They're quite hard to get to without ending up crashing into those gates, for example, just then. Or do you just avoid all the scoring gates and flags and stuff and just get to the end of the lap and the race as quickly as possible? So it's a bit of risk and reward gameplay if you're going for score. We're not too bothered here about getting like a massively high score or anything like that. We just want to beat the game. And so yes, we're going to go through all 5 stages one after another. And it's unfortunate there that we had 2 crashes in a row. Sometimes that's just unavoidable with the layout of the track and stuff. It's a lot more tightly packed than the arcade version, I feel. Oops. And I forgot about them. So a lot of this comes down to memory as well, and learning the tracks and knowing where like some horrible obstacles end up appearing. Oh, another crash there, dear me. So I've not tried to do this run as the most perfect run ever, so you will see me crash and scrape through with like a millisecond spare on some of these tracks. So I'm not trying to do this like a perfect run without like crashing once or anything like that. The game is really tough. And the time limit is extremely tight as well. It's one of the toughest versions of the game I've played, actually, compared to some of the other versions. I find the Commodore 64 version much easier, for example. 5th leg or lap. This is the last one of this racetrack. Hit a rock whilst after jumping, and you should end up back on 4 wheels. So yeah, this is not me playing at my best. Indeed, I did the first racetrack and then came back to do the next one like a few days later. And I actually get a little bit better as we progress through the game on the later tracks. I did 1 track at a time, recording this long play. So I actually have quite a few silly crashes here, and I actually get a lot better as we go along. So yeah, plenty of crashes here, but there's plenty of time I've managed to accrue from the time gates. See, what I learned to do in the future when I was in a situation like that is just go into low gear. And sometimes you don't. It's easier, obviously, to get around the obstacles then, but also you may not always have a fatal crash when you end up on the roof. So don't be afraid to switch to low gear to get around some tight obstacles like there. I was actually quite lucky. And that was a silly crash to make. Quite a bit of flicker there happening. Some objects, half a sprite disappearing, reappearing there on the rock. Missed the football there. So yeah, the flickery sprites are not helping matters, especially when there's like 2 or 3 laid on top of each other. There we go. 11 seconds to spare. Finish with 8 seconds left on the clock. And there you go. There is the off-road track done. Now, of course, all the tracks after this won't sort of loop around. They actually have 5 different distinct checkpoints with different track layout and objects and stuff. So as we move on to, I think it's north. Yeah, go north. You see on the map there, there's 5 different sections of the track. It doesn't loop around. It's almost a checkpoint racer. And we appear to be in like the North Pole or something like that. Or an icy, wintry wonderland. So, right. So yeah, the tracks are largely the same as the arcade in terms of layout. There are some minor differences, like I think on this one, in the arcade, when we come to a section of water and there's a bridge over it, in the arcade, there's actually 2 bridges with a gap in the middle, whereas on the Amstrad version, there's only 1 bridge. So that's a minor difference. Obviously, we talked about the flags are not colour coded, and you can collect them in any order you want to. Which actually weirdly seems to be quite an easy thing to code, and is rather a miss, especially with the colour palette available on the Amstrad to colour those flags. So it's a strange thing they didn't do there. Oh yes, and one big thing is actually, as you progress through the stages, you actually, in the arcade version, you actually come across other competitor buggy racers and cars. The other competitors are completely missing in the Amstrad version. I guess that might make things chug too much, and also we'd have horrible flickery graphics. They're obviously not masking or zoring, or whatever it is you call it, to stop the sprites from flickering, obviously to save time on CPU cycles or whatever for a more faster, smoother gameplay. And it does move really smoothly. It moves really smooth, and I'm really happy with it. And I really enjoy playing Buggy Boy. But one of the things I really don't like about the Amstrad version is the turning of the car. So steering left or steering right. So how do I explain this? This is really frustrating at times. So if you steer left or right whilst reducing your speed, you'd think you'd have a more stronger turning circle and be able to avoid objects a lot easier. But instead, the physics doesn't really change. You just still sort of sail into the object as you would at a higher speed, almost, it feels like. Or there's very little difference. Meaning it's extremely hard, if you're too slow to react to an oncoming object, to get around it. Often in racing games with obstacles in the way, you would like really rapidly reduce the speed, drop into low gear, put the brakes on, and you'd have a significant sort of turning circle available to you on the car with the physics. On the Amstrad version, not so much. So you just have to keep an eye on the horizon as much as possible and see where objects are coming, and immediately start like manoeuvring like a second or two before you think before you think you have to, if that makes sense. So I'm always looking at that line on the horizon as to what's just coming up, if I can. Well, obviously keeping a close attention to what's coming right at the car at the time. That's difficult to do, so sort of to flick your eye line between that horizon and also where the car sprite is. So yeah, the manoeuvring of the car around the track is a bit of a problem. Certainly on other versions of the game, like the Amiga one, you press left on the controller to turn your car left, and it flies across the screen horizontally to the other side, like it's on ice or something like that. That's like it's overdone on the Amiga version. And I would say that sometimes it feels like the controls are a little bit oversensitive on the arcade one, original too. Whereas on the Amstrad, they're quite tight and not as icy, if that's the right word to use. I think you get where I'm going, guys. Right, so let's talk about the people behind the Amstrad version. So the coding was done by a guy called, oh, that was tight there, unlucky. The coding was done by a guy called Andy Williams. And this game may seem familiar because the engine code base was clearly reused in his excellent Live and Let Die, which is arguably the best Bond game on the CPC, which is that speedboat game, and plays and feels very, very similar to Buggy Boy. I don't blame him for reusing the code here because it's pretty solid. Andy Williams also coded the excellent Bomb Jack and its sequel, Frank Bruno's Boxing, all for Elite. And then he also did a breakout clone called Impact for Audiogenic. And that's the last of his Amstrad credits I can find. Are probably moved on to 16-bit machines by then. Graphics were done by a guy called Pete Tattersall. His only other credit I can find being also on Live and Let Die with Andy. It's a shame actually. The graphics work is pretty. Well, it's not too bad actually. It's pretty good. It's definitely above average. Old tree stumps there put you on two wheels. I don't know what those. I think they're bushes. Bushes will slow your speed down. Oh my god, some tight sections here. Oh yes, with time gates here. So it's important to know where the time gates are on each track, and it requires practicing each track over and over and learning the track layout. Obviously, it's very, very hard to do. Things tend to end up starting to look a bit similar to each other. So what I did to get through this long play is I made a note of where the time gates would appear on each leg or lap of each track. So for example, I'd write down like lap 1, the first time gate appears in the middle, second one to the right, and the third one to the left. Then lap 2 I put right, and then I put middle right-ish, and then far left. So I know after I get to one time gate, I'm going to stick to sort of one side of the screen as much as possible where the next time gate is going to be. Or I'd make notes. Oh, that was close. I actually just ran out of time before the finish line, but I did a little jump there and that just took me over. Now you'll notice here on the high score table that my score for the previous racetrack is there for off-road, and it's storing, but that's apparently, but it shows north. So that's a little bug in the game there. I should say, it's supposed to show this high score table separately for each track, yet it will show scores done on other tracks, despite showing the track for that score on the high score table. So we were entering the score there for north, but it showed the north track and its layout below the scores. But you can see my score for the off-road track. I think that's either something they totally forgot about and left it to the last minute and probably didn't realise, or something like that, or it's bugged. I don't know. So it's a bit of a shame on the high score table. But yeah, as I was saying, I make a note of where the time gates are. So there was the first one in the middle. I think the next one should be on the right hand side of the track, according to my notes, if I'm reading the right bit of it. Let's see. So as you can see, I'm sticking to the right. Yeah, it was sort of middle right-ish, that was right. And the next time gate will be on the left hand side of the track. Look, you got the ramp there for a little bit. It might score you some extra points. And yes, there is the time gate on the left. So I went through each of these races and made notes of where the time gates are. Time gates, if you remember, are really important because they add an extra 2 seconds per gate onto your time. There you go. Extended play plus 6 seconds, because we got 3 time gates. 2 times 3 is 6. So we've got an extra 6 seconds on this leg. And they're so important because the time limit is really tight. I mean, if you go through this without collecting any of the time gates, it will be impossible to complete. So it's really essential that you do. And I've started learning here about, like, let's just drop into low gear to get around some of the more difficult obstacles and tricky sections. So we were just talking about the coders there. but I don't have any credits for whoever did the music jingle or sound effects in game. As we heard, the jingle is accurate to the arcade original, and to be fair, there was no music in game in the coin-op either. We don't get any music here. The engine sound though isn't too annoying. Quite common in racing games on 8-bit computers. Getting that engine noise right is really, really difficult. You want it to sound right, but without being too annoying on the eardrums. And I'll take the square waviness sound of this engine noise over more farty sounds of engine noises in racing games. Like, I much prefer the engine noise here to the one in like Burning Rubber on the GX4000, for example. But as I said, guys, my main issue here, apart from the speed of the game, it could have done with being a bit faster. But I think if it was any faster, given how close together the objects are on the track, it would have made the game like next to impossible. So the track and the layout of the track would have to be sort of extended out to compensate for having a faster speed. Anyway, but my main issue is, of course, the turning of the buggy. It doesn't shift left or right across the track as fast as it should do, meaning if you're slightly too slow to react to an oncoming obstacle, it can be pretty much impossible to avoid, and it really bugs me. And slowing down hardly helps much, and braking really hard is not so good on a tight time limit either. So yeah, just gonna have to use the low gears. In fact, I should have used low gear there, and I would have survived without going on my roof. Ah, forget the football there, we don't care about points. There we go, leg 4. So, let's talk about the other versions of the game. So, let's start with the good old Specky version. So, on the ZX Spectrum, well, you have to admire the balls on the Specky version to attempt the sprites the size they are. The sprites are absolutely ginormous on the Specky and often take up like half the screen near enough. The buggy itself is absolutely massive. I mean, the buggy was pretty big on the coin-op original, but it didn't take up half the screen. So I'm not sure what the coders of the Specky version were going for there. So whilst the Specky version is technically impressive, and it's certainly playable, the frame rate severely suffers for the large sprites. And whilst I have to tip my hat to it, and it's still fun to play, in terms of gameplay, it's by far the weakest of the 8-bit version, sadly, but impressive nonetheless. Commodore 64 version. In terms of its size and scale and colour, this is very similar to the Amstrad version. And initially, I thought it would be a very, very close run horse between the CPC and the C64 as to which is the better version. But after playing both, I did fire up the Commodore 64 version and give it a good play. I do have to hand it to the Commodore 64 version. It's faster, the controls are far better, and it's just simply more fun. It's also more accurate, and it also features like the opponent buggy racers in the game, which is missing on the CPC. And I think it also has the colour-coded flags. So yeah, I have to say that the Commodore 64 version is the best 8-bit version to play, followed by the CPC version, and the impressive looking, but sadly laggy Specky version in third place. And there was only 2 other conversions to the 16-bit machines, and that's it. So we have, let's talk about the Amiga version first actually. The Amiga version, initially I thought, wow, this is fast and smooth. Then I realised I was playing it in 1200 mode in my Amiga emulator. On the actual Amiga 500, it's quite a bit slower and not as smooth, but it's still fast and playable and controls quite well. If I are rather a little bit oversensitive, I actually like this, but I hear from some Amiga owners they really hated Buggy Boy on it, so it seems to divide opinion, especially looking at reviews by people on Lemon Amiga. But it is also an Atari ST port, but its sound effects and music are surprisingly weedy and weak, and I think the Amiga generally overall can do a little bit better. Oh, as we finish the east track there we go. But yeah, it's hard to put my finger on what the problem is with the Amiga version. I think graphically it could have done a lot better. So, but it was an ST port, and talking about the Atari ST port, well, original, sorry, the ST original, well, it's the same as the Amiga, but I actually prefer the sound effects and music on the ST, which here actually sounds more like the arcade original, and aren't as weedy. But then, if you have a more powerful Amiga, like the 1200, then that wins. So there you go, those are the other versions. As we move on to the penultimate track, the West track. I like this because we actually got sort of green background there. Change colour. I should mention as well, actually, I like how the when we go around a bend, look at the horizon. It scrolls with us as we go around a bend. That is actually a nice touch. We've got some nice sort of orangey brown hills in the background, and they actually scroll when we move around. Move around a sort of a tight bend, and that is a nice touch. You know, for a racing game engine, this is pretty solid. I just wish it had a little bit more speed. So, let's talk about magazine reviews. Now, as always, look for the review in Amstrad Action magazine, because that was the main Amstrad magazine, of course. This was reviewed in the February 1988 Amstrad Action issue 29. And I was a bit surprised, actually. They found this rather average. They marked it down for some flickery graphics. That's fair enough. It can cause some confusion. Sometimes you can't see the sprite behind the oncoming sprite. So if you're going for a gate, there might be a rock not far behind it, and it's flickering in and out of existence, and you can often crash. So that's a fair point. They marked it down also for uninspiring sound effects. I think that's rather unfair. I think the sound effects are pretty decent here. I don't think they could have done much better, really. But most of all, they marked it down for the lack of speed, and I guess that's fair enough as well. Although they did counter that by saying if it did go faster, it would be unplayable with the obstacles too tricky to avoid. That is absolutely true. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't, maybe? I don't know. Maybe work on the track layout a little bit more. But yeah, as I said before, I guess the obstacles could have been spaced out a bit to compensate. Anyway, they rated the graphics at 76%. I think that's harsh. I think the graphics are worth something in the 80% range. Sonics at 46%. Again, that's damn harsh. None of the sound effects here are offensive on the ears. I mean, the engine noise does get a bit monotonous after a while, but it's better than a lot of other car engine noises in other racing games. So yeah, I think that's a little bit unfair. They gave the grab factor 73%. I don't know. When I first started playing this, I really loved it. It was only as I played more of it and realised how tough it was, and that I got quite frustrated with the game. So I would probably give a higher score for grab factor than staying power. In fact, they gave staying power 64%, which again I think is a bit harsh. But I would put the staying power lower than the grab factor, certainly, like Amstrad Action have done. But I would give higher scores for both. And they also give it, they gave it an overall AA rating of 70%, smack on 70%. Which feels way too low for me. This is definitely a very, very competent and playable racing game. In fact, I would probably have this in my top 10 racing and driving games on the Amstrad CPC, despite its lack of speed. I mean, speed is obviously essential in racing games, but it's not so slow that it's too slow, if you know what I mean. It trundles along at an okay speed. It just needs a bit more of a bit of sense of thrill and excitement, I feel. I mean, it scrolls and moves really smoothly. And the sprite scaling is really good as well. I forgot to mention that earlier. Sprite scaling can be a very, very difficult thing to do and achieve, but I think this pulls it off with aplomb, actually. But yeah, I think if you had to make it faster, you'd probably have to sort of skip a few frames, which would make the game look pretty choppy. unless you did a whole different racing engine from scratch, and the racing engine here is pretty decent. So I kind of like Buggy Boy. I admire how technically well done it is, and how hard they've tried to match it to the arcade original. Although not having the colour-coded flag seems a bit of a weird omission, when it would have been, I would have thought, a fairly trivial thing to do on the Amstrad, and especially with all the colours available on the Amstrad's palette, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, so all in all, I think this is an excellent arcade conversion. If you compare it to the arcade original, yes, it's a lot smaller in size. It's a bit slower, and it's missing some of the features like opponent races, and some minor things like 2 bridges instead of 1, colour-coded flags, etc. But they're quite minor things, really. The core gameplay is intact. The track layouts appear to be intact on the arcade original. And it's one that is still fun to play. And despite its faults, ends up being one of the better racing games on the Amstrad. Like I said a second ago, I think I'll put this in my top 10. Yes, it could do with being a bit faster and adding a few more features to the corner, but most of all, it needs to sort out that steering. That's my biggest issue with the game. Like here, I find it really hard to navigate around obstacles. I'm going to have to really drop down low into low gear and put on the brakes there to get around things. The car should, when you reduce speed or drop down a gear, brake or whatever, and you start steering left and right, it should move across the track a lot faster horizontally, if you know what I mean. That would be the first thing I'd improve on the game rather than the speed, because navigating around the obstacles can be a really frustrating experience, and it feels like you've been steering around an object for like an absolute age and you just still trundle into it and hit it and then crash, and it's just ultra frustrating. So this took me a long time to do this Longplay, guys. Actually, it's taken me a good couple of weeks to sort of master each of the tracks. They were hard to do, and look, I did it like with split seconds to spare there, and like other tracks. There you go. And we're going to move on to the final track there. So with all that being said, though, I think I will still rate this. I tend to do this. I always give my scores out of 10, and they're either like a number or a hot number and a half or whatever. So I think I'll rate this an 8.5 out of 10. I'm almost like, should I knock it down to an 8 out of 10? I'd probably give it like an 83% or something like that, somewhere in between 8 and 8.5. But I will just round it up to 8.5 out of 10. Or otherwise, I'd probably give this something like about 83% or something like that. What score would you guys and girls give this? Let me know in the comments. I'm interested to know your feedback on it as well. Is this game too slow for a racing game? Does it really matter? Is having it running more smoothly and less choppy more important? I think so, but obviously in terms of racing and driving, you want to have the most amount of speed possible and feeling and sensation of speed. But for me, when I was playing Buggy Boy in the arcade, it wasn't racing to the end as fast as possible, because you're not racing against opponents for the vast majority of it. You're trying to avoid obstacles and collect things. So the sense of speed here perhaps isn't as important as it would be on a game like Outrun or Lotus or WC Le Mans, etc. We have a lot more to deal with rather than opponent races and just going around bends of a track. We've got like absolutely tons of obstacles to avoid. I was saying that though, the Commodore 64 version plays quite a bit faster, and I find it easier to navigate around. So, do I have anything else to mention here? I don't think so, actually. But it's still a fairly early arcade conversion. Now, I said at the start of the video, this was released by Elite Systems in 1988. if you actually look on the disc, it lists the year as 1987. I think some of the other versions managed to come out for Christmas '87. I think maybe the Commodore 64 version made it out for Christmas. When I went looking for reviews of this game, all the Amstrad magazines were reviewing this either at the earliest February 1988 or as late as like June, July '88. I've seen in some French magazines. Amstrad actually reviewed this in February, so I think this Amstrad version didn't make it out for Christmas '87, and I think this was like early '88. This perhaps squeezed out, maybe even sort of spring '88. Perhaps Amstrad actually got an early review copy. A lot of games after Christmas, there tends to be a bit of a lull. No one tends to release many games in January and February, and maybe even March. It's like March, April, kind of springtime, where a big bunch of games gets released. Oh, actually, no. To be fair, there was a fair few games that comes out in January because they know kids have some Christmas money they want to spend. They generally don't. They aren't usually sort of like AAA big release games. They're like the second run games that they've got completed. They know that wasn't that good, so we'll shove it out in just straight after Christmas or around the springtime. I think Buggy Boy on the Amstrad probably was intended to be a Christmas release, and maybe it did hit Christmas. Maybe it got released in late December, just in time, and the magazines didn't have a chance to pick it up and review until straight after their Christmas issue. Because Amstrad actually did a Christmas issue, which was like a December and January combined. I think I can't remember. They tended to review a big bumper number of games in their December and January issue. Anyway, I'll stop rambling on about the dates and rambling on about dates and stuff. Oh, this is a really tight section there. Look at that. If you're in low gear and you sort of clip a rock, you don't get knocked on your roof there. So top tip here, guys and girls, if you're worried about an obstacle coming up, switch down to low gear. But if you've done a jump and land on top of a rock, you won't end up on your roof and reduce the speed down to 0. You will land on all 4 wheels with a little bit of a reduction. Oh, that was silly. Every little crash is going to cost me here on these last 2 legs of this final racetrack. Oh dear. I'm going to be scraping the seconds now at the end of this one. It's risky taking those jumps. Often a rock is placed right where you land from a jump, so you never know if jumping off one of those logs is going to result in death or not. When I say death, I mean a crash like that, of course. Here we go on the final leg, on the final track here. And I'd like to know in the comments, guys and girls, what are your top, your top 3 racing driving games on the Amstrad? Because at some point soon, hopefully this year, I'd like to do like a top 10 Amstrad racing / driving games video for the channel. So let me know in the comments below what your top racing and driving games on the Amstrad are. Maybe in what order. That would be very, very helpful for me as I compile my list. That was really tight there. So just sticking in low gear got me through that really, really messy section there, which is partly my own fault. Got the football there. Nice touch as it flies off into the distance. Yeah, really abusing the low gears there. Alright. And the final leg here. Ooh, 20 seconds to go. Quite close to the end. Will we make it? Look at all the rocks it's thrown at us. Don't worry about the time gates on the final leg. Oh god, I crashed. The time gates do nothing for you. So don't worry about getting time gates on leg 5. 10 seconds to go. 5, 4, 3, 2. We did it with actually 3 seconds to spare there. And there you go. That is Buggy Boy completed. that is all the tracks done and beaten. You can see all my high scores there in the table. It shows the south track there on the high score table, but it's not a separate high score table. It's one table for all the tracks. I think that's a mistake, omission, or bug, or whatever. That's a bit of a shame. But there you go, that is Buggy Boy completed on the Amstrad CPC. So yeah, I'll give this an 8.5 out of 10, or on a score of right 83% if we're doing percentages. Thank you very, very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What would you score this game? And what are your favourite racing driving games on the Amstrad? Alright, thanks for watching, and see you all again very soon. Goodbye.
So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please click a like below, leave a comment, and also subscribe if you haven't already. And over that way, there's another video for you to check out. Zypho, out.